video is broadcast on LSL Podcast Channel. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to the channel.
Welcome to the Laura Ingraham Show, your healthy radio addiction. I'm John Hinderaker from Powerline, filling in for Laura today. We've got a great show for you. We're going to be talking with Congressman Ron DeSantis later in this hour. We're going to be talking second hour about the shame of America's public schools, and we're going to have a shocking example of the leftism that has become so pervasive in public schools all across the United States. You're going to want to hear that, and we're going to have Lila Rose in the third hour. I want to start out this hour talking about the big news story of the day, and that is the disaster that appears to be unfolding in Alabama. And you all know the story. Judge Roy Moore, to the surprise of a lot of people, he's got a very checkered career, but to the surprise of many, many people, he won the Republican Senate primary, and he was, I think, comfortably ahead in the polls. And then all of a sudden, the Democrats started pulling out a series of women who claimed to have had encounters with Judge Moore way back in the 1970s. I'm not sure what the total count is up to right now, 5, 6, 7. I don't know. Apparently he was banned from a mall because he was allegedly pestering teenage girls. Some of what has been disclosed, I don't think is bad. In other words, it's acknowledged that he actually dated some teenage girls who were above the age of consent when he was around 30 or in his early 30s. That's unusual, but it's not illegal. And it was a long, long time ago. I think Judge Moore has been married now for 33 years, something like that. He's got a bunch of children, grandchildren, and as far as I know, these things come so thick and fast. You know, you can miss things sometimes. The allegations come out, but as far as I know, Roy Moore has not been alleged to have had any kind of improper conduct with any woman in decades since the 1970s. Nevertheless, the situation is, by all accounts, cratering. The latest poll has Roy Moore trailing his Democratic opponent by 12 percentage points. Other polls show the race closer, but clearly moving in the wrong direction. Many national Republicans have withdrawn any support from Moore, and there's a move afoot. There are some, including some Republicans, who say that if he should win the special election now scheduled for next month, they will refuse to seat him. There will be an ethics proceeding which could drag on for forever, and might result in Judge Moore never being seated as a U.S. senator, or being expelled if he is seated. So it's a terrible situation. Right now, it looks like that seat is going to go to the Democrats, which is just tragic. This is, of course, Jeff Sessions' seat, has been for several terms. When Jeff Sessions ran for re-election 3 years ago, the Democrats didn't even field an opponent. There was a write-in opponent who got, 5% of the vote or something. But the Democrats didn't even nominate somebody to oppose Jeff Sessions. I mean, that's how safe this seat was. And now every indication is that unless something dramatic happens, the Democrats are going to steal that seat by virtue of these 40-year-old allegations against Judge Roy Moore. What do you think of this? What do you think the Republicans ought to do? Is there a strategy to try to save that seat? 855-40-LAURA is the number to call. Give us a call. Let us know what you think the Republicans ought to do nationally and what Republicans in Alabama should do. I've defended Judge Moore, and I've defended him longer than almost anybody, I think. I think it's a terrible precedent for a political party, as the Democrats have done in this case, using their tool, the Washington Post, to go around, goodness knows what the manpower that the Democrats put on this story. And these are people who have laid in the weeds for 40 years. I mean, think about that. 40 years. These women have not said anything publicly. And Judge Moore has been a prominent figure in Alabama politics for most of that time. He's twice been the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. And yet, these women stayed silent. And then weeks before this special election to fill Jeff Sessions' seat in the U.S. Senate, just weeks before, the Democrats all of a sudden pull out of their hat these now middle-aged ladies who tell stories about things that allegedly happened back in the 1970s. And I tell you, it is a terrible, terrible precedent, and we're going to see it again. The Democrats will wait until shortly before an election, and then they will pull out. They'll find or they'll fabricate, one or the other, some kind of ancient story about Republican candidates, and try to use those ancient stories to upend the election. And it's working in this case, apparently, and I'm afraid if it works now, it's going to work in the future. It's a terrible, terrible precedent. Let's go to Dennis in Florida on line 1. Dennis, you're on the air. What do you think?
I think it seems to be their modus operandi. And I recall the dossier coming out publicly just days before the inauguration. It could have caused chaos.
Well, you're right. I mean, yeah, no, you're right, Dennis. But let me ask you this question, Dennis, and you may not have an answer. I'm not sure any of us has got an answer. What, given this whole situation, given the current polling, given everything that's happening, what do you think the Republicans should do now?
Let the election run its course. If the judge was inappropriate in behavior, I don't think there was anything criminal, but anyway, inappropriate, you should say, I apologize, I'm not a saint yet, but I've tried to correct things since then, like all of us.
Well, that's one of the ironies, if this had come out years ago and Maura just said, yeah, I did a couple of bad things back in the 1970s, but that was long ago and I've changed my ways, this would have been a nothing problem. Let's go to Karen in Wisconsin on line 2. Karen, what say you?
The statute of limitations for bringing out these allegations was 3 years. And they bring them out now, right after he wins the third time. I mean, he's won over and over. The people of Alabama want him. I don't think it's fair for the government to step in on a federal level and take that election around. No matter what they have said they want, but Judge Moore, I think they know more than other people in Washington, D.C., what this guy really is. And maybe it's mistaken identity on some of these things, but you know what I mean? I don't...
Well, Karen, let me just pause you there for a second, because you used a key phrase there. You said the statute of limitations on this crime in Alabama is 3 years. I'm not sure if that's right offhand, but there is a statute of limitations that is not 40 years, I can tell you that. And, of course, a lot of people say, well, the statute of limitations is relevant to a criminal charge and certainly relevant to a civil proceeding. If you try to sue somebody, you can't wait 40 years and then say, oh, I think I'll start my lawsuit now. And the statute of limitations doesn't, of course, legally apply, doesn't technically apply in an election context, but the rationale for the statute of limitations does apply. And the rationale is that if you let too much time go by, it becomes very, very difficult to find out what the truth is. After 40 years, who knows? And I'm afraid, I think that's a big part of what makes me so unhappy about this whole situation. Let's go to Rick in South Carolina on line 3. Rick, what's your take?
Hey, couple things. One, my mother had my oldest brother at 16 and me at 18. She was married to, and that was approximately 40 some odd years ago. And I don't think there is a law anyway against what he did. And my dad was 12, 13 years older than my mom. And also, the polls that came out 2 days after the allegations showed Moore still ahead by about 9 points.
Yeah, you're right about that, Rick. I mean, I was looking at that polling and following it closely, and I was thinking, well, a lot of people in Alabama aren't buying this. He's still doing okay in the polls. But the trend is very bad, I got to tell you, Rick. I mean, the last poll that's come out has got the Democrat ahead by, I think it's 12 points, if I remember correctly, and the trend is just, very, very bad. And I think the consensus is that that the seat is going to go to the Democrats if something doesn't change. Let's go to John in Arizona on line 6. John, what do you think?
Well, if you consider Judge Roy Moore to be a sexual predators usually repeat their crimes over and over and over again. They just don't get cured of it. And all of this was supposed to have happened, 40 years ago. And he's got a sterling record by most people's accounts over the last 3-4 decades. The other thing about this is purely hearsay. Nothing has been proven, and anyone can make a statement libeling someone else and getting away with it. In this case, costing a very important election for the country as a whole. People ought to think twice about this.
Let me just pause there because we got some other people I want to hear from. This is just such a hot topic. A lot of people want to be heard. But I want to emphasize something you just said, and that is that people who are sexual predators generally don't stop. And it's very strange that there's all these women that have come forward and they talk about things that happened 35, 40 years ago, and yet in the last 35 years, nothing. Here's a guy that's been married for 33 years, I think it is, and nothing. And with all the hysteria that's going on right now, if there was anybody out there in the last 35 years who had something negative to say about Judge Moore, I'm sure we would have heard from her. And yet that isn't happening, and it certainly does make you wonder. On the other hand, I gotta say, we're not talking about just one person. If it had just been one, I think the credibility issue would have gone Judge Moore's way, and I was defending him, on credibility. But at this point, we're not talking about one or even two. We're talking about more than that. We are going to run to a break now. If you are holding, please hold through the break, and we will take more calls after these messages.
Thanks to my wonderful sponsors and your support, I'm glad to say that we can provide this podcast at no cost to you at all. As a loyal listener of my program, please consider testing our sponsors because they're the ones who actually cover the cost to produce this daily show. So if you're a dog lover like I am, how about giving your dog, your best friend, a fresh, healthy, and nutritious diet? When dogs eat well, they live longer and happier lives. I'm here to tell you about NomNomNow.com, which cooks the world's best dog food. It's made fresh in the USA and delivered right to your door every week. Nom Nom Now's customized recipes cook fresh in our kitchen, delivering healthy nutrition you can actually see. Switch to Nom Nom Now and your dog will have more energy, a shinier, softer coat, and a longer, better life. Nom Nom Now really is the best food for your best friend. And right now you can save 50% on your first 2 orders of fresh, healthy dog food when you use my code Laura at NomNomNow.com. That's code Laura and save 50% on your first 2 orders. NomNom now.com and code word LAURA.
Welcome back to the Laura Ingraham Show, your healthy radio addiction. All eyes are on Alabama and what appears to be a slow-motion disaster for the GOP. We're taking your calls. What should we do? Where do we go from here? Does Judge Moore still have a chance? Should he have a chance? Should the Republicans stick by him? Should they abandon him? What's going on? What should we do? Let's go to Julie in Virginia on line 4. Julie, welcome to the program.
Good morning. You mentioned earlier that we're going to hear about this again when it comes from the Democrats, and I think it's shaping up to be their new race card. They may not replace the race
sexual
card
harassment
altogether, but they'll certainly add to it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what do you make, Julie, of this idea that let me tell you something I think and see if you agree with me. I think that part of what's going on here is the whole hysteria over improper sexual conduct that started with Harvey Weinstein in Hollywood and has extended into the media. And now here's another one that's come along. And everybody seems to assume that any allegations that are made against anybody, must be true. Do you think that's part of it, that this has just been swept up in this whole hysteria that we're seeing?
Well, it's a part of it, but the Republicans are always a day late and a dollar short. They don't know how to respond to anything. They don't have a playbook to respond to anything until it happens to them, and then they're caught with their, hands in the air.
Well, they sure got caught flat-footed here. I think you're right, Julian. I think we're going to be seeing, if this works, I'll put it that way, we're going to see it again. I want to take a couple more calls here before the break. Let's go to John in Pennsylvania on line 1. John, you're on the program.
Hi. I kind of look at this in a different way. This is exactly why people, and I'm a Republican, this is why people hate Republicans. They just have no integrity. They have no backbone. I mean, they race to microphones to disavow this guy, and they don't know if he's innocent or guilty. They have no way of knowing this, but yet they disavow him, and they're going to lose this seat. They should have just said, I don't know if he's innocent or guilty or not, and then that was the end of it. But they, like that lady said before, they don't know how to answer questions. The right answer would have been, well, I don't know if he's innocent or guilty or not, but what about Melendez? How come you're not talking about him in New Jersey? You know,
yeah, that's one of the ironies. There's a Democratic senator right now, Robert Menendez, right now on trial in criminal court, charged with felonies. Completely under the radar. Reporters have taken the opportunity to ignore that, and instead there's hysteria over Judge Moore. Let's go to Robert in Utah on line 5. Robert, you're on the air.
Yeah, am I on?
Yes, fire away.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, a couple things. Okay, a couple things. For one, like this lady said, it's the new race card. They've learned that if they tell a lie long enough and as many times, get as many people as possible to say it, that people will believe it. It's what happened to Romney, with, he never paid any taxes. And you'll just...
Which they just completely made up. Just out of whole cloth.
Yeah, and it's not until after the election's over with that it comes out, and they're like, well, so what? We won, didn't we? That's their thing. And also, I used to be in the entertainment industry, and when they tell actresses to act, like they're crying, they take, if they use tissue, they bat the outside of the eye so they don't smear any makeup. And that's what a lady did. Not one tear came from her eye.
Yeah.
And
but look, Robert. I mean, I think there's some more that came out. I think in the New York Times this morning, and I mean, I've lost count, but I think we're up to something like 9 women now that have come out with various kinds of allegations. Apparently it's true that Judge Moore was banned from this mall because he was viewed to be harassing teenagers. I mean, there's an awful lot of smoke for there not to be any fire, don't you think?
Yeah, well, I want to see the proof of it. He was actually banned from a mall. Because they'll say anything. They'll pay people. We'll find out later. All these women were paid by Soros, and they're like, hey, I was getting free money to, act. Because they sure weren't on Clinton when Clinton was actually, there was all the proof of him.
Well, you can't help wondering. Judge Moore has been active in politics for a long time. He's twice been the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. You sure wonder where the heck these women were then. I do anyway. I want to go to David in Virginia on line 6. He's raising an interesting point. David, you're on the air.
Hey there. So I don't think I've heard this. I actually haven't been able to listen to the show because I'm at home. But Roy Moore, for the latest accuser, he actually sat on her divorce case, and so that's actually come out. I believe he dismissed her divorce case. Back in 99.
Yeah. She said he never saw him again. Turned out that he was the judge in her divorce case. There's a lot of this swirling around. I mean, I'm skeptical of some of the allegations. At the same time, you got to admit there's an awful lot of them. We're up against the hard break. When we return, we're going to be joined by Congressman Ron DeSantis. We'll be talking about special counsel. Welcome back to the Laura Ingraham Show, your healthy radio addiction. I'm John Hinderaker from Powerline, filling in for Laura today. We're going to be joined by Congressman Ron DeSantis to talk about potential second special counsel investigation. Until we get Congressman DeSantis on the line, though, let's take another call or two. Let's go to Wendy in Kansas on line 2. Wendy, you're on the air.
Hi, I just wanted to say a couple of things if we have time. Shame on the voters in Alabama. If they switch their support for Roy Moore at the 11th hour based on these recent allegations from 40 years ago, I mean, I just am dumbfounded that they would let that influence them when we see this over and over and over again by the liberal media and by the Democrats that throw out something like this just to confuse everybody, and here we go again. We excuse Ted Kennedy for Chappaquiddick. We excused Bill Clinton for the blue dress. And now
a lot more than the blue dress. You know, Juanita Broderick said he raped her. Bill Clinton lost his license to practice law and paid a fine of, $60,000, $90,000 for committing perjury in a sexual harassment case. And he's the most popular guy in the Democratic Party. There's no question that what you say is true. I mean, the double standard is just astonishing. Have we got David in Virginia on line 6? He dropped. Okay, let's go to Andy in Nevada on line 4. Andy, welcome to the program.
All right. Thank you, sir. Just wanted to go ahead and make a few points as well. The lady who called before me said that this would actually be the new race card. No, absolutely not. It's actually a point bulletin number 2 on 3 points. The go-to move is the race card. The second move is basically what they're doing now. And the third move, you're either dumb, illiterate, or stupid. If those 3 fails, they'll go to something else. But absolutely, they've been doing this for years. People, they don't even remember. Just as recently as Donald Trump, they did the same thing to him. And going back all the way to Herman Cain. When Herman Cain was running for president, about 6 or 7 women jumped out of the woods. And all of a sudden he had to retire from the race, and the women disappeared. Nothing became of it. This has been going on for decades. It's nothing new. What we need is new leadership, man. McCain, Ryan, they are complete frauds. They're establishment. And one thing that people need to understand, the biggest enemies of Donald Trump and guys like Roger Moore is their own party. The Republican Party is their biggest problem and enemy right now. It's not the Democrats. We know the Democrats.
Well, you know, to be fair, it was the Democrats and the person of the Washington Post that dredged up these 40-year-old accusations against Judge Moore. I want to take another call or two before we're joined by Congressman DeSantis. Let's go to Maria in Tennessee on line 3. Maria, she just dropped. Okay, let's see who have we got still on the line. Dennis in North Carolina on line 1. Dennis, you're on the air.
Well, thank you. Greetings. I don't believe this one bit. This is now the Democrat Party playbook. The dossier was fraud. And plus, if you go back 20 years, 1997, today is November 16th. What day of the week was it? What did you have for breakfast? What did you do that day? What was the weather like? Nobody remembers. And this man defended the 10 Commandments, lost his judgeship over it. And they expect me, or the voters in Alabama, to jump ship and vote for the party that gave uranium to Putin.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I agree with most of what you say there. You mentioned the dossier. Of course, that's this fictitious so-called dossier on Donald Trump that the Clinton campaign colluded with the Russians to produce, and it's just deeply ironic. We got Robert Mueller supposedly investigating alleged collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, which didn't happen. And it's now been reported and apparently accepted as fact that the Clinton campaign did collude with the Russians. So who's investigating that? Nobody. Mueller is investigating everything under the sun, but he's not looking into the collusion that actually happened, at least as has now been reported, which is collusion between the Clinton campaign and the Russians through this guy Steele in England to produce not just dirt on Donald Trump, but lies, fictitious, false dirt on Donald Trump in the form of this dossier, which the Democrats in the Obama administration then colluded to release to the press to smear Donald Trump in the last weeks of the presidential campaign. This is one of the biggest scandals in American history. And at the moment, at least, there isn't anybody investigating it. I want to change gears now. We've been talking about Judge Roy Moore and what seems to be an unfolding disaster in Alabama, where at least the most recent poll data seem to indicate that the Democrats are going to be able to capture that seat by virtue of these very old allegations against Judge Roy Moore. But I want to change gears now and talk about a different topic, which is something I've been writing about on Powerline. If you're not familiar with Powerline, just Google it or go to powerlineblog.com. And one of the things I've been saying is that Jeff Sessions should appoint at least one more special counsel to look into issues that are not being investigated by Robert Mueller and are not part of his charge. And one of the issues that I think needs to be investigated is the Uranium One scandal. And Peter Schweitzer, in his book Clinton Cash, I think he's the one who first wrote about this, and more facts have come out since then. But briefly, Russia got control of about 20% of all of the uranium in the United States through a transaction involving an outfit called Uranium One. And apparently, it's known that they contributed millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation. And there's strong suspicion that the contribution of millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation was quid pro quo in exchange for Hillary Clinton, who was then Secretary of State, approving this transaction where the Russians got control of 20% of our uranium. This was investigated by the FBI, and it's been reported that the FBI found strong evidence of criminal activity here and recommended criminal prosecution. But the leadership of the FBI refused to bring the case. And who was the leadership of the FBI? Well, at different times, it was a combination of James Comey and Robert Mueller. And so I, for one, have written on Powerline that we should have a special counsel to investigate this whole Uranium One scandal, including the FBI's apparent cover-up of the Uranium One scandal. And part of that investigation would be what role did Robert Mueller play in covering up that scandal, if any, and what role did James Comey play in covering up that scandal? And why were these Obama administration officials so eager, or so I'll put it this way, so reluctant to approve a criminal prosecution that clearly seemed to be justified? We're going to run to a break right now, and we will return after these messages. Welcome back to the Laura Ingraham Show. John Hinderaker from Powerline filling in for Laura today. We're going to talk about a subject that's really deeply troubling now, and that is what's going on in America's public schools. And we're going to talk about one school in particular, Edina High School in Edina, Minnesota, which for years was known as one of the premier public school systems in the United States. And I've written about this extensively. The organization that I run, Center of the American Experiment, made this the cover story in the latest issue of our magazine, quarterly magazine called Thinking Minnesota. And it was about the leftist indoctrination that has been going on in the Edina, Minnesota public schools. But it's not unique to Edina. It's not unique to Minnesota. We're seeing the same leftism creeping into the public schools all across the country. Often it is propagated by consultants that are brought in. The Pacific Educational Group, PEG, is one that you see across the United States. They were brought in to the Edina schools to steer those schools in a leftward direction, and it's all about a so-called racial equity agenda that they use to drive a leftist orientation. And oftentimes it involves actual harassment and hostility toward conservative students and conservative parents, or anybody who doesn't conform to the left-wing agenda. And there's been a new outrage at Edina High School. And again, it's typical, I think, of many, many public schools across the country. And this new outrage stems from something that happened on Veterans Day, when the school, Edina High School, had a program honoring veterans, an assembly in the school gymnasium. And to talk about what happened at that assembly and what's happened since, and fasten your seatbelts, folks, because this is a shocking story. We are now joined by Jasmine Edmond, who is a sophomore at Edina High School. Jasmine, welcome to the Laura Ingraham Show.
Hi.
And thanks for being with us. Jasmine, there were actually, I think, 2 sessions of this assembly honoring America's veterans on Veterans Day last Friday. Is that right?
Yeah, there was an Assembly 1 and then an Assembly 2 because we didn't have enough room for everybody to be there at once.
And I believe, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this same demonstration of contempt for America and its veterans happened at both of those assemblies. Is that right?
Yeah, it did.
And describe for us, if you would, Jasmine, what some of these students did during these two assemblies.
Well, when the national anthem went by and all the old veterans walked up, we all stood up and took our hats off, but they sat down in the middle of the gym floor and didn't stand up, and they played music, and I think one of them kneeled, and they were laughing and just weren't paying attention.
So we have some veterans actually on the floor of the gymnasium, and we're doing this ceremony with the flag. They play the national anthem. Most of the students, of course, stand up. But there's this one group of students who are, and it's been videoed, and I've actually put the video up on Powerline. They are lying on the floor. They're lounging in full view of all the other people at the assembly. They're laughing, they're talking, they're playing music, and not paying attention. And then later on, they played the song Taps, which, of course, is in honor of those who have died in their country's service. And what did these same students do while Taps is being played?
They sat on their phones, and the kids who were standing right behind them said they couldn't hear the orchestra play the songs because their music was so loud.
So here again, they go out of their way to demonstrate contempt and hostility, really, toward the United States, toward the flag, toward our veterans, toward those who have died in their country's service. Now, some students at Edina High School were upset about this display on the part of these the sort of protesting, if you will, students. And in particular, there's a group, I think, called the Young Conservatives Club. Am I saying that right, Jasmine?
Yeah, the YCC Club, yeah.
Yeah, the YCC, Young Conservatives. And you're a member of that group, I think. Is that right?
I'm getting in currently. I have to get through, we have, a president and some more stuff, so you have to go through.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, you're in the process of joining up with the YCC. And a group of boys, high school kids, who are members of the YCC, have their own private chat set up, and I forget now what it's called. Jasmine, what do they call that?
Group chat, like a group message.
Yeah, it's just a group message thing. It's not school sponsored. It doesn't use school facilities. It's just a private thing that these 4 or 5 guys have got. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so after there was this just shocking demonstration of contempt for America by these students in the high school, these 4 or 5 boys who are members of the Young Conservatives Club were chatting among themselves. And what kinds of things were they saying, Jasmine?
Well, they had been chatting after they had gotten threats for what they posted on Twitter, the videos of the kids sitting down. And they were talking about, the threats that they got. And I heard that, kids were telling the principal and the assistant principal, that there was racist stuff happening inside of the group chat. So then an authority at the school took one of the boys' phones and got all through the messages.
Okay, so originally they went on Twitter and they were criticizing on Twitter these left-wing students who were demonstrating during the national anthem and during taps, lying on the floor there in front of everybody. And so somebody said, "Oh, I think that they may be exchanging some racist text messages among themselves." And so somebody, do we know who it was, Jasmine, the principal? But it was some school official went to the president of the Young Conservatives Club and demanded to see his cell phone. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. Yeah, they took his cell phone.
They took his cell phone, and of course the principal or whoever it was wouldn't have been able to get into the cell phone. So did he demand that the kid, tell him the code to get into his cell phone?
Yeah, he basically told him, you have to open your phone.
So he made the kid open his phone, and then the principal or whoever it was, some authority figure from the school, went into this private chat group that these 4 or 5 high school kids have, and looked at the chats. And what were the chats all about? Just briefly.
Well, some of them said, if you don't like it here, then why don't you go back?
And going back refers to the fact that a lot of the kids who were doing this protesting, there were a dozen of them or so, something like that, in each of these assemblies, are Somali immigrants. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so the text messages said things like, if you hate America, why don't you go back to Somalia? Is that the kind of thing we're talking about?
Yeah, they said things like that. Like, if you don't like it so much here and you don't respect the people who are letting you be free here, go back to Somalia.
We're talking with Jasmine Edmond, and it's about, I think, just a shocking scandal that's taken place in a very well-known, well-respected public school here in Minnesota, but it's typical, unfortunately, of things that are going on around the country. Jasmine, can you stay with us through the break? I want to continue this conversation.
Yeah.
Jasmine, you stay with us, and we will be right back after. Welcome to the Laura Ingraham Show, your healthy radio addiction. I'm John Hinderaker from Powerline, filling in for Laura today. And we are talking about a scandal that is unfolding in a public high school, a very well-known and formerly renowned public high school in Minnesota, Edina High School, Edina, Minnesota. And it all grows out of a program that they had at the high school to honor veterans on Veterans Day. And a number of students protested, and they lay down on the floor of the high school gymnasium in front of the crowd, refusing to stand for the national anthem, even for taps, when they played taps in honor of veterans who have given their lives in service. These students made a show, made a display of lying on the floor. They talked, they laughed, they played music. And afterward, there were some conservatives in the high school, members of a group called the Young Conservatives Club, who criticized this anti-American display on Twitter. And we have with us Jasmine Edmond. We were talking with Jasmine before the break. Jasmine is a sophomore at Edina High School, and she's in the process of joining the Young Conservatives Club. Jasmine, thanks again for being with us.
Yeah, thank you.
So I just want to read, first of all, a tweet that one of these protesting students did. This is responding to a tweet that the Young Conservatives Club did, and this leftist student says, and I will never respect this country or what it stands for. I don't respect the fact that our president is an open racist. Never will. And guess what? That's my right. So if I sit while veterans are being praised for being murderers, then that's my right. Stop starting Twitter wars. And is this the kind of thing that you saw, Jasmine, in the aftermath of this demonstration?
Yeah, a lot of the kids were taking. So not only the YCC took pictures of them, there were other students who weren't a part of the YCC who took offense to it, and they took pictures of the kids sitting down and they put it on like their Instagram or like their Twitter or their Snapchat. And now the kids who are sitting down are claiming that they have they needed consent to take pictures of them, and they are taking them to the office, and that it's their right to sit down, and that they don't really care what you think about it.
And another thing that happened is that people started making threats against the members of the Young Conservatives Club. Is that right?
Yeah, there was threats.
And I think you're aware, Jasmine, of the, I'm sure you've seen the YouTube video that one of these left-wing students wearing one of these stupid Guy Fawkes masks, the kind of mask I'm talking about. Jasmine?
I don't know if I saw it.
Yeah, well, let's play the audio. They actually took down the video from YouTube. It's about a minute and a half, but it's threats by this leftist student. What you see on camera is this student wearing one of these dumb masks that the fascists wear at demonstrations when they don't want their faces to be seen. And he sits behind a desk and he threatens these conservative students at Edina High School. Let's just play the audio because it is frankly very. This is just unbelievable to me. So here you've got this guy wearing a mask, going on YouTube, with this video making threats against the members of the Young Conservatives Club. Were YCC members, were they scared about this? How are things going for them at the high school?
Well, that happens a lot whenever they wear anything Republican. They get just torn up. People threaten them. They get shoved. They get just called racist. It's a very usual thing.
And there have been actual physical confrontations, I think, in the halls and so forth. Isn't that right? Where people have surrounded members of the conservative club, threatened them, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Jasmine, we were talking before the break about the fact that there are 4 or 5 members of the Young Conservative Club who have got their own private little chat set up on their phones or whatever. It's not a school function, and it's not sponsored in any way by the school. It's just personal, just talking to each other. And as these events were taking place, somebody from the school, a principal or somebody, went to the president of the Young Conservatives Club and demanded his cell phone, and then demanded the code, or demanded that the kid open up the cell phone. And then he found whatever this private chat system is on this boy's cell phone, and he looked at it, and it had texts where these boys were talking to each other, and they were saying things like, if you don't like it here, why don't you go back to Somalia? Because a lot of the kids who were doing this were, in fact, Somali immigrants. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so I want to kind of get to the punchline here, Jasmine. We've been laying out the facts of this, I think, rather shocking story from Edina High School, one of the long regarded as one of the premier public high schools in the United States. So these kids who made a display of anti-Americanism and being opposed to veterans, thinking veterans are murderers, and they're lying down on the floor during the playing of the national anthem and again during the playing of taps. Have they been punished in any way by the high school?
No, they haven't.
And the students who uploaded the threatening video, talking about cutting off the tentacles and so on, threatening the members of the Young Conservatives Club, are you aware of any punishment at all that the school has imposed on those kids?
No, they have not gotten in trouble.
And I just read a tweet from one of these left-wing students who talks about, I don't respect. She says, I will never respect this country or what it stands for. She says, if I sit while veterans are being praised for being murderers, that's my right. The students who have said things like that, are they being punished in any way by the high school?
No, they don't get in trouble.
So, but what about these 4 kids who are members of the Young Conservatives Club and have been exchanging these texts where they were being critical of the demonstrators, showing contempt for the country? What's happened to those kids?
They got in-school suspension.
So the high school has announced that because the high school administration doesn't like some of these texts that they were privately exchanging, not even in public, but privately exchanging among themselves, those 4 members of the Young Conservatives Club have gotten what you called an in-school suspension. What does that mean?
It's basically detention. It goes into your record as a suspension, but you are at school in a room doing all your work, and you don't get to go to the other classrooms, and you eat lunch in there, and you don't get to talk to anybody.
So it's basically what we used to call detention. I got detention a couple of times, but not for something like this, I'll tell you that, Jasmine. And so if they apply to college, they're going to have to disclose, presumably, that they got suspended. Is that right?
Yeah, it's on their record.
Well, Jasmine, I really thank you for being with us. I think this is a scandal, and unfortunately it's not limited to this one public high school in Minnesota. Things like this are going on in public schools across the country. We have these outrageous displays by leftists, and the administration apparently sympathizes with them, has actually praised them. We didn't get into this, but the administration has actually praised those demonstrators because they were, quote, peaceful. Apparently, as long as they don't actually slug anybody, it's okay. So Jasmine Edmond, sophomore at Edina High School, you were terrific, Jasmine. I really thank you for being with us. We're going to go to a break, and we're going to have more on this story and another guest, the father of one of these suspended Edina High School students, when we return after these messages. Welcome back to the Laura Ingraham Show. We have been talking about a scandal at a public high school, a very well-known public high school in Minnesota, Edina, Minnesota. And we had Jasmine Edmond, who's a sophomore at Edina High School, a member, or about to become a member of the Young Conservatives Club there, talking about the demonstration against the United States, against the flag, against veterans, and the fact that some members of the Young Conservatives Club criticized those demonstrations And in a private chat among 4 or 5 of these kids, not even anything public, private chat, said things like, if they don't like it here, why don't they go back to Somalia? Because these kids, most of them, or maybe all of them, were Somali immigrants. And school officials confiscated a cell phone and demanded it be opened and access those private communications. And on the basis of those private communications, they suspended 4 members of the Young Conservatives Club while doing nothing with respect to either the people who carried out these anti-American demonstrations or people who threatened the members of the Young Conservatives Club with violence. So we're trying to get on the phone right now. The father of one of the suspended students. I think he's going to be with us in a moment. Before we do that, we're going to go to John in Minnesota on line 1. John, welcome to the program.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I told your call screener, I live in Florida now, okay, but I lived in Minnesota for 9.5 years, and I'm a 27-year Air Force veteran. I spent 19 years in recruiting service for the Air Force. And this whole story about Edina, Minnesota, just really caused me to forget everything and have to call you. Because when I was in recruiting, now, I went into recruiting in 1975, so you can figure somewhere between 75 and 76, I was recruiting at Edina High School. Now, that's, 40-some years ago. And at that time, the counselor, the student counselor for the school, we had to go through them to arrange things like, set up in the hall and talk to the students at lunchtime or what have you. And this guy, I still remember his name. Of course, I won't say that on the air because that's irrelevant at this point. But he said, well, I guess we can let you stay in the breezeway. What they have in those colder climates, for a lot of people who don't understand, is you'll have your doors to go into the school or into any building, and then you got another set of doors just before that to keep the cold air from shooting in.
Say, John, we've got one of the father of one of these suspended students on the line, and I want to get to him here before we run up against the hard break. But the point you're making, though, is that a long time ago you were already encountering anti-military sentiment at this high school. Is that right?
Exactly correct. That's why I wanted to weigh in. It's because, and we were treated great by some of the students. They thought it was unfair the way we were being treated.
Yeah. But so the roots of this go back a long way in time. We're going to be joined now by Phil Ebner, who is the father of one of the suspended students at Edina High School. Phil, thanks for being on the program.
My pleasure, John. Thanks.
Now, we've been talking with Jasmine Edmond about this, Phil, and talking, we played the audio of this YouTube video by the guy in the mask threatening members of the Young Conservatives Club, and talked about the fact that somebody from the school administration actually confiscated the cell phone of the, I think it was the president of the club. Is that right?
Yeah, the principal basically took the individual's phone and went through it, and a GroupMe private message. Went through it, and then that resulted in a suspension.
Yes. So it was actually the principal of the high school who did this?
Yes. Now, in fairness, I do believe he said, "Can I see your phone?" Now, in my world, at least where I grew up, you respected the principal and did this. He didn't know that his rights could have been to say, "No, I don't want you to see my phone." I think he used his power to get the phone.
Yeah, that's understood. And of course, he wouldn't have been able to just access the phone. He had to have the student either give him the code or make the student or ask the student to open it up, right?
Correct.
And so the principal, just to make sure we understand this correctly, we had this demonstration. It was criticized on Twitter by members of the Unconservatives Club. There was reaction to that, pushback, threats made against the members of the Unconservatives Club. Now the principal... Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
No, I was just going to say, it was a video highlighting the demonstrators at the Veterans Day Assembly. And they, the Young Conservatives Club basically said, we're just disappointed. This is not how we should act in a ceremony to honor our veterans. And then immediately on Twitter, there were individuals, from either the Black Student Union or this EHS Antifa that immediately started disparage and used very foul language. In fact, you've got it up on one of your blogs, the Twitter, the statement, and when your 11th grade daughter calls you on Friday from work and says, "Dad, I'm being bullied. I'm afraid to be here," there's a little bit of a concern.
And this is your daughter you're talking about, who's a member of the Young Conservatives Club.
Yeah, she's an officer of the Young Conservatives Club.
And has this been a problem? I mean, I've heard reports of groups of left-wing students surrounding members of the Young Conservatives in the hallway and that kind of thing, threatening them, bullying them. Has this been an issue?
Yeah, as early as yesterday, there was an individual that was surrounded in the Commons area, and the principal, fortunately, broke it up, but then actually disparaged the kid that he shouldn't have been in the Commons.
Yeah, it was his fault because he was in the Commons area of the high school where he could be attacked or bullied by these leftists.
Yeah.
So 4 of these kids now have been suspended as a result of private communications, things like, if you don't like it here, why don't you go back to Somalia, something like that.
Correct.
And what are the parents doing about that? I mean, I don't want to give legal advice over the telephone, but I really don't think the school can do that. What's going to happen next?
Well, we are there. Let's just say there's plenty of concerned parents, and we are going to get together here rather shortly. And really, I mean, my number one concern and my always concern has been safety for my child. I shouldn't have to worry about that at Edina High School.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. Phil, we're up against the hard break. Thank you for being with us. We're going to continue to follow this story. I mean, it's a scandal, and unfortunately, this kind of thing is going on across the country. We're going to be back with Congressman Ron DeSantis. Your Healthy Radio Addiction. I'm John Hinderaker from Powerline, filling in for Laura today. And we are joined now by Congressman Ron DeSantis. Congressman, thanks for being with us.
Great to be here.
Congressman, I want to jump right in and start talking about an issue that I've been writing about on Powerline for a while now. I hate the special counsel statute. I think in general these special prosecutors are a bad idea. But frankly, if we've got Robert Mueller roving over the countryside investigating God knows what, some of us think that what the Trump administration, the president and Jeff Sessions, ought to do is appoint another special prosecutor or special counsel. Talk to us about that.
Well, we have a number of issues. One is the Uranium One scandal. We know that there was bribery, racketeering, money laundering involved with that. That's never really gotten a true look and investigation vis-a-vis the Clinton Foundation and the Clintons' role in that. Rod Rosenstein's the deputy AG. I believe he would be conflicted out of that because he was involved in one of the prosecutions, and I think there's questions about that. Jeff Sessions, when he testified at his confirmation hearing, he said he was going to recuse for any issues involving the Clinton Foundation. And so if that's the case, you have the number one and number two who would need to be recused. I think the obvious thing would be to just assign a special counsel, because a lot of what we're going to have to get the details on in terms of Uranium One is an investigation of the Justice Department itself and the FBI and how they handled this and why this information wasn't produced to Congress or the CFIUS board prior to approval of the Uranium One deal. If Jeff's not recused, then he can obviously lead that investigation. But he said when he testified in January that he would recuse on the foundation. And so to me, that means a special counsel would be appropriate.
Congressman, you just said something I want to follow up on because I think it's important. Part of the scope of this investigation would relate to the FBI because FBI agents generated this evidence of criminality, and yet the people at the top of the FBI refused to do anything about it, and I would say effectively covered it up. Now, who were those people? Well, they were James Comey and Robert Mueller. I think they should be targets of this investigation.
So you had a confidential informant who's now stepped forward and he's going to provide all his documents, and he's got audio recordings. He's got a lot of stuff that he's providing to Congress. We're obviously going to get a debrief from him. He eventually may testify publicly, but we're certainly going to get a lot of information from him. He started working with the FBI in 2009. So he was working with the FBI. He was gathering a lot of incriminating evidence in 2009, 2010. The CFIUS board's approval of uranium-1 was until the later part of 2010. And so here he is for a year and a half gathering evidence. And I think the question is why weren't indictments brought at that time, given that they had evidence, we think, according to his what he's proffered to us, of criminality. And not only were indictments not brought, why wasn't the fact that you had an ongoing major bribery and racketeering investigation pertaining to this very deal, why was that not something that was disclosed to members of Congress or to members of the board? And so we're going to have to find that out. I mean, think about it. Something of this nature involving a sensitive transaction like that, because if it's not a sensitive transaction, it doesn't even need to be approved by the CFIUS board. So a sensitive transaction of that nature, high-profile bribery involving foreign nationals, the idea that the Attorney General of the United States, and then Eric Holder, would just not know about that, and yet he was one of the members on this board. So there's all those questions, and you will have to ask very hard questions about what the FBI did, their role, and then what the Justice Department's role in all this. And the Clintons, obviously, with the money going to the foundation, you hear the Shepard Smith did this thing saying, oh, this has just been debunked. He's like, there was all the money from the foundation happened years before and all that, and that's just not true. I mean, you had $2.3 million from the chairman of Uranium-1. A lot of that was undisclosed, go into the foundation 2009 and 2010. So that at a minimum, not to mention Bill Clinton's $500,000 fee for a speech around the same time. So there's a whole host of issues that are going to be involved in this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think most of our listeners know this, but just to make sure we're clear, what's going on here is a series of transactions that the effect of which was to give the Russians control over, I think, about 20% of all the uranium in the United States, right? So this is very, very serious business.
Right, and there's a couple components to that. I mean, a lot of people think uranium, Russia's going to have more nukes. That's not necessarily the case. I mean, but what the one issue is we import a lot of uranium, and so if Russia is in control of 20% of what we have domestically, that could really hurt our efforts to get that when we need it. And there's been a push to have more of a domestic supply, so this obviously cuts against that. The other issue they didn't have an export license to export it, so we don't have to worry about this uranium going around the country. Well, it turns out that, yes, they did not have an export license, Uranium-1 didn't, but there were a lot of decisions made in the bureaucracy, obliquely and indirectly, that effectively allowed uranium to leave the United States. And we know it went to Europe and we think places in Asia, and it very well may have ended up in countries. We're trying to confirm where it all went, but it could have ended up in countries that all of us would agree are hostile. So, a lot of with the media, they just don't want to deal with this issue. And look, my view is let the facts fall where they may. I mean, let's get the informant, let's get his documents, let's talk to the people we want to talk to, and let the American people render their judgment. If the Justice Department sees evidence of crimes, and they obviously could take control of it, but there's an effort, it seems to me, to try to act like this is not a big deal when it is a big deal.
Well, that's absolutely right. We're talking with Congressman Ron DeSantis about the effort to get a second special prosecutor appointed to look into the Uranium-1 scandal. Just in the studio where I am today, Congressman, the TV's on with the sound off, and they've been showing Hillary Clinton on television saying that the Uranium-1 scandal has been debunked. and therefore it would be an abuse of power for any kind of investigation to proceed. But far from having been debunked, we're still waiting to find out what this confidential FBI informant has to say and what documentation he's got. Isn't that right?
Right, and then the liberal media sources that, quote, debunk it, they rely on Hillary making a self-serving denial that, oh, she had nothing to do with this. Now, give me a break. I mean, I think we've been around the Clintons long enough to know that self-serving denials are not the end of the story with that. So, yeah, no, we're going to have to do that. And look, it's an issue of, I mean, look at how Mueller is handling his investigation. I mean, he's scorching the earth. You know, they're putting a guy like Papadopoulos, a nobody, making him plead guilty to a false statement. And it's a very, very zealous application of the law. Well, with Hillary, I would say in how the foundation operated in terms of the lack of scrutiny they received, but even in terms of how Hillary conducted herself before the Congress. I mean, you know, did she ever get brought up on any false statement charges when she said under oath to the Benghazi Committee that she turned over all work-related emails, or that her attorneys went through every individual email to determine whether they were work-related, or the fact that she claimed none of the emails had any classified markings? Those are all demonstrably false statements, and yet you didn't see a prosecution commenced under 18 U.S.C. 1001 for her, but Papadopoulos you do. And so I think what bugs a lot of the American people is it seems like they're just different standards, and it seems like justice is politicized. They'll be very zealous, where Mueller's doing whatever he can to make a case on anything under the sun, whereas the Justice Department and the FBI, with respect to Hillary, pretty much do whatever they can not to make a case against her.
Yeah, that seems pretty obvious. You know, Mueller's investigation is ranging all over the place. It's been reported he's investigating Vin Weber, former congressman, longtime lobbyist, who trying to find out whether he may have done work on behalf of one of the Ukrainian political factions without registering as an agent of a foreign power, whatever that statute is. I don't know what in the world that has to do with the scope of the investigation that Mueller has been charged with, but he's just roving over the countryside investigating what would appear to be irrelevant matters. But Congressman, this is the other thing I really want to ask you about. One thing that Mueller is apparently not investigating is collusion between the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Russians. You know, originally he was supposed to be investigating alleged collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Well, that didn't happen. But there's strong indications that there actually was collusion between the Clinton campaign and the Russians with respect to this fictitious dossier that was then leaked. What do you think? I think we should have a special counsel investigate that.
Well, think about it. Donald Trump is on path to the nomination in the spring of 2016. So the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton's campaign, they send millions and millions of dollars to Perkins Coie law firm, who then pays Fusion GPS to do opposition research, which also involves hiring Christopher Steele. And Christopher Steele is basically working with Russian agents to develop the information that became part of the dossier. Just the fact that they laundered the money through Perkins Coie law firm, that in and of itself is problematic. But then you have what Steele was doing. He was working hand in glove with foreign nationals to get derogatory information on then candidate Trump. And remember, when Donald Trump Jr. had a meeting with that Russian lawyer, everyone said this was the biggest thing, that, oh, he was interested in getting some opposition research. Well, in Hillary's case, some of that opposition research very well may have been paid for. We don't know whether Steele was paying any Russians for it, but there's certainly a possibility. But we do know that Hillary and the Democrats sent a lot of money via Perkins Coie to Fusion GPS, who was doing this. We don't know, and we're trying to find out, whether the FBI also paid Christopher Steele, because what happened was this dossier is out there. We know the FBI eventually took cognizance of it, and I think we pretty much know they paid Steele. We're just trying to figure out whether it was for this or something else. And so then the question is, the FBI takes what's basically a partisan, unverified, false opposition research document. They potentially pay taxpayer dollars to get that, and then they might have, and we think probably, used parts of that dossier to justify surveillance of some of Trump's associates. So this is really it's Democrats
they also
involved
leaked
with
it
Russians.
they also leaked it to the press. They have this meeting. The intelligence guys have this meeting with Trump. They say, we have to tell the president about this dossier, and then that's the excuse for leaking it to the press. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. So he gives Comey goes and says, Mr. President, here's this dossier. Then the next thing you know, CNN is running a breaking story because even the media, as anti-Trump as they were, they would not print the dossier during the campaign, even though some of them had it, because they knew that they would open themselves up to problems because a lot of this stuff was false. So they wouldn't do it. But this meeting gave them the hook to say, Comey's briefing Trump about this. What is this dossier issue? Then CNN and BuzzFeed go ahead and do it. The existence of that meeting was leaked by a very high-level Obama administration appointee, and obviously we've seen other leakings there. But then what happened was, I think the fruits of the surveillance were kind of the basis for a lot of the anonymous leaking that would go to fuel the Washington Post, the New York Times, NBC, CNN stories about contacts between Trump associates and Russians that went on for February, March, April, and really led into the existence of the special counsel. So this dossier, it very well may be the case that was what has birthed this whole Russia collusion narrative from the beginning.
And ironically, the dossier itself was apparently the result of collusion between the Hillary Clinton campaign and Russians. I think, Congressman, this is the biggest scandal in the history of American politics. And I've written that I think that the Trump administration should appoint more than one special counsel. They should appoint one for Uranium One. They should appoint a separate one to look into potential collusion between the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Russians and all of these matters relating to this fictitious dossier. Do you agree with that, or do you think there's a better way to pursue that investigation?
No, it needs to be investigated. I don't know if Sessions would not answer whether he was recused from the dossier issue. I guess since it involves the campaign, he would be. But you're right, Mueller is not going to look into that, and so if we want answers to that, that's going to have to be done by a different prosecutor. We are looking at it in the Congress. The FBI has fought Congress tooth and nail to provide the documents that were used to justify the surveillance of Trump associates, and they fought us tooth and nail on confirming whether they paid Christopher Steele any money as part of taking cognizance of the dossier. But you're right about you have a political party colluding with Russians to get derogatory information against an opponent. But I think what makes it even worse than that is the role of the FBI and our intelligence agencies at the high level. They may have also been involved with justifying the surveillance based off partisan political opposition research, and that is really a perversion of some of the higher levels of our government. So Comey, he's going to have to answer questions about this. Clapper and some of these other guys. This is just not the way the government is supposed to operate, and it is very, very scary to think that they would have taken this Steele dossier and then justified surveillance of Americans based on that.
It's a shocking scandal. Congressman Ron DeSantis, thank you very much for being on the program. We're going to go to a break and then be back with more on the Laura Ingraham Show. Welcome back to the Laura Ingraham Show, your healthy radio addiction. We've had a dynamite show today. I hope you've been with us all the way, and I hope you stay with us till the end because there is more dynamite yet to come. I want to just tease this because it's breaking news that's just coming out right now. It's just coming out today. We talked earlier in the program about Judge Roy Moore and the allegations that have been made against him dating back to the 1970s and got a lot of opinion from callers about that. Well, there's a new story that's breaking, and it's not about Roy Moore. It is about Senator Al Franken of Minnesota. And it is about sexual harassment allegedly perpetrated by Senator Al Franken, not back during the 1970s, nowhere near the 1970s, but in December of 2006. And there's a first-person account of that sexual harassment that has been made public. And when we come back from this break, I'm going to read from this first-person account, and we're going to talk about Senator Al Franken and whether he needs to step down from the United States Senate. So don't go away. We'll be right back after